He said, use as fuel the stuff you cut down. Use as fuel the shame and the guilt from your past. Use as fuel all of the different things that you said turned your life into total chaos. Use as fuel that pregnancy out of wedlock. Use as fuel that failed marriage. Use as fuel that pride that once kept you apart from God. Use as fuel, come on, I'm getting somebody's street right about now, that drug addiction that you thought was going to end up killing you. Use as fuel that hatred and bitterness from abandoned, fatherless family. Use as fuel that time you spent in prison. Use as fuel those folks who ridiculed you and criticized you and said you wouldn't do anything with your life. Use as fuel that past criminal history. Use as fuel, come on, I'm getting in somebody's house right now. Use as fuel that sexual abuse that happened very long ago. Use as fuel use as fuel. He didn't tell him to get fresh wood. He didn't tell him to get some stuff and go cut down a tree from. I want you to use as fuel everything that the devil used to try to kill you. Because when you use as fuel what the enemy tried to, oh man, I'm speaking to somebody right now. When you use as fuel what the enemy used to try to kill you, you become a testimony, a walking testimony of what God can do to somebody who can pull down so he can build up. Some of us are going to leave this place pulling down pride. Some of us are going to leave this place pulling down resentment. Some of us are going to leave this place pulling down bitterness. And end up leaving this place building up a new altar. See, as strongholds in your life are broken or cut down, God is authorizing you to use them as fuel for your altar. As God is authorizing you to pull and cut down the stuff the enemy used against you, God is going to use it as fuel for your altar. That lustful spirit that he pulls down is going to be used to bring somebody who's broken in the midst of prostitution and all kind of crazy stuff. That spirit of confusion of gender identity that tried to destroy you and confuse you and mess you up, as you pull that down, he's going to build up a new altar of true, genuine identity of who you really are as a son and a daughter of Christ Jesus. If you pull down, he'll build up. See, because before God can do anything about your situation, because a lot of us are asking God for do something about a present situation, but he can't do nothing until you do something about your worship. Because he's looking, he's searching, he's seeking. Where can I find? That's one thing God is looking for. The Bible doesn't say he's looking for anything else, but it says that he's looking for worshipers in spirit and in truth. In other words, my worship can't come from a place of the fear and the lies and the unbelief that the devil tries to feed me. My worship needs to come from the truth that comes from his word, from the boldness that comes from his spirit. That's where my worship needs to come. So if we're going to get our vision and our mission right as restoration worship, we need to really know what it means to raise up true restored worship. Because we can grow numerically, but still be midgets spiritually. You cannot expect God to break off your bondages and you still have certain connections to certain people and certain places and certain lies that the enemy tries to feed you. I can't live in God's truth until I cut down the devil's lies. Some of you are probably asking, what is worship then if it's not just singing the songs? I'm glad you asked that. Worship is really summed up in Romans chapter 12, verse 1. If you were to just really summing up to one Bible verse, you could look at Romans chapter 12, verse 1, where it says, present your bodies as a living sacrifice. That is your true and perfect worship unto God. And it's interesting because the next verse, you would think that he's talking about something else, but he's really not, because the next verse says, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world. Cannot copy the patterns of this world. I can't lift up the same Asherah poles that those people are lifting up out there. I got to be able to lift up an altar built on God's truth. It says, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. I think is not in line with God's will and his promise and his truth, then I will be feeding my altar with the devil's lies. And for me to be able to offer true worship unto God, it starts with my heart. Tell your neighbor, it starts with my heart. Changing the way you think. Then you will learn to, it was good. Because misdirected worship will never align you with the will of God. A heart that is filled with conflicting thoughts will not be able to present true worship unto God. If you're going to write something down this morning, you need to write this down right here. A heart that is filled with conflicting thoughts will not be able to present true worship unto God. I gotta empty all of the enemy's junk so I can fill it with God's stuff. Otherwise, I walk around like a Christian agnostic. For those of you that don't know what an agnostic is, it's a person who doesn't believe in God, not because they completely disregard that he might exist, they just haven't had an encounter with him. They just take things as they are, what they see, their reality. Their truth becomes their reality. And there's a lot of believers like that. They come to church, they raise their hands up, and they believe God on Sunday, but they don't believe God for certain things because they haven't seen him work, or at least haven't been aware of the work that he's already doing. Sometimes that's our biggest problem, in not seeing God work in our lives, but not being aware of the work that he's already done. Because if you become aware of what he's already done, you begin to worship him from that point and enable him to do more. Tell your neighbor, I want him to do more. I'm almost finishing up. So every time that the Israelites looked at the Asherah pole, they were reminded of the false hope that they have. Because look at what Romans says. Romans chapter 8, verse 24. It says, hope that is seen is no hope at all. They had hope on something that they were seeing, but they didn't really have any hope at all. Real hope is on stuff that you haven't physically heard, physically seen, but you know that you serve a God that is real, that is going to answer every single prayer that you've said unto him. So they didn't forget the miracles the Lord did in generations past, but they forgot who was behind it. And this is how the enemy tends to keep us in bondage. He wants us to maintain one thing and still have the other thing there. And with God, you have to make a decision. You have to make a decision. Are you in the kingdom or are you just a spectator? Are you going to leave behind the habits, the customs of your past life in order to embrace the promises that God has for you? And for some of us, that fear is holding us back. That fear is holding us back. And let me tell you something. Gideon went to do what God instructed him, but he didn't do it with all this crazy boldness. Because see, a lot of times, when certain people get out of certain situations, we think that they did it with all this courageous boldness and they heard this loud voice from above, "This is the Lord your God." Not all of us did it from that point. Some of us did it with some fear. Some of us actually had to do it in the middle of the night. It says here, if you read on, it says that in the middle of the night he went to go tear down the pole. You know, like he didn't go grab an axe like, "Yeah, we're going to pull this down now. We're going to do this." He huddled up with 10 guys and said, "Hey guys, this is what I'm thinking we're going to do. What do you think?" And you always got a person who's like, "I don't think that's a good idea, man. I heard they killed a couple people last time they did something like that." Shut up, man. Just do what I'm telling you. He gathered with 10 of his boys. And he said, "Hey, guys.